kind of going back to the conversation around the amount of brands that you've worked with. Again, quite an open question, but like, how do you get into these brands? Like, these are sometimes it's tough to kind of get in. It's tough to find the work from these particular brands and organizations, because sometimes when they're so big, it's like, where do I even start? Like, how did you manage to build up a portfolio of working with this many brands? Did they come to you or did you go to them?
So I think for me personally, I was as a photographer, I worked in two fields. One fairly, what do you call this? Fairly conservative field, and one fairly new field. So streetwear is the newer and more youthful and more open field. And the more conservative field that I'm working in is music. So Universal Music and so on. There are more conservative clients than, in my opinion, Nike, for example. But I got into this field very differently. So I'm just taking these as an example. So the conservative photography field I got into because I did, for not necessarily as a job, but just out of my own interest, I took some pictures at certain events and I did share them on my blog, or I did share them with people around me, and they got aware and started perceiving me as an event photographer. And that is really a key point of, that's why I also said, realize that the world is watching, because it is really interesting how your profession can be very different to how you're being perceived. So the perception of your creative work is really crucial for what you will be booked for. And therefore, all the work that you do are part of your corporate identity, the corporate identity that is you as a creative, if you know what I mean. And the other part, the not so classic or not so conservative work that I do for photography, started because I was very interested in sneakers, and these sneaker brands obviously also saw that I was a photographer, and certain events like sneaker releases and so on, I kept on taking pictures. So all the work that I did starting off to get into that field was just personal work. It was not work that I did as where I had clients or where I was actually booked for, but it was all work that I was personally interested in, and then, showed it to the world through certain media outlets. And that led to brands realizing, okay, so there's this photographer. I'm just gonna say photographer now, not female or male, but there's this photographer, this person who is, on one hand, I don't know if they thought that I was good, but good enough for booking, and on the other hand, had the advantage of knowing about sneakers and sneaker culture. So this was two wins that the client would see in me, booking me, for example, for a sneaker event, because they would know that on one hand, it would be easier for me to photograph the people because the scene there knows me already and wouldn't be so shy and so disrupted by my presence. And on the other hand, I knew the scene, so I knew what I was looking for in the pictures. If you do a sneaker release and you don't shoot a picture of somebody putting a shoe on and having a big face about it and things like that, you know what I mean? So, there's a certain components that are your qualities that people perceive, and they will book you for these qualities. That's why I say it's really important to think about what you're showing of yourself and how you're showing it, how you're presenting it. Presentation is key in this business.
Yeah.
You can do also the same with not showing your work. You can do your best work and present it in the wrong way, and it will just look really bad. So, yeah.
So then how important do you think it is to have a niche? Right. So in your case, it was, I guess, started off anyway through the sneaker scene, and you kind of really, brands started to find you and establish you as, I guess, the sneaker event photographer, quote unquote. How, because I know a few other creatives, and they're known for a certain thing. And that's a good thing because, you get recognized and you build your brand as that. But then I guess sometimes it gets to a point where you don't want to just be identified as that thing. Right. So how important is it to have a niche, or do you think it's better to maybe open yourself up to be a little bit more, I guess, flexible in what you offer?
I think all the perceptions about a creative are creating also a lot of boundaries and restrictions for that creative. Because, for example, I started as a portrait photographer and I always saw myself as a portrait photographer. But because I've earned most of my money and worked in the field of event photography the most, nobody sees me as a portrait photography or fashion photographer. And therefore, I don't get booked for these jobs a lot. Of course, I do also get booked from the people who know that I have these skills, but I don't present myself majorly in that way. And so therefore, yes, there are also restrictions that come with the way people perceive you. And finding a niche is, in my opinion, crucial because you need to get your foot in the door somewhere. You need to have a standing somewhere to spread your wings from there, in my opinion. And for me, I don't know if I created or I was just pushed into these niches, but for me, having different niches to work from made things a lot easier because I don't want to say it in that way, but I am a minority in a sense that as a woman, if I go to an event and I'm a photographer, I'm usually the only woman as a photographer. If I go to an event for sneakers, now not anymore that much, but I also used to be only the only woman there. And I think that by itself just created a niche, so to say, around me. And but it made it also easier for me because like these restrictions restrict that you can go out of this niche, they also support that they give you a stronger identity in that niche. So I don't think I would have been successful as a sneaker consultant if my niche as a female sneakerhead would have been so strong.
Yeah, and I think this is so relevant in, I guess, business as a whole, right? If you want to look at the biggest scale, I guess, out there, you can look at Amazon as an example. Right? Amazon started selling books. Now their TV platform, they have all these other devices that have nothing to do with selling books, but they started and recognized and established their foundation as one thing, and then grew from there. So I think it's
there's always room to grow.
Yeah, and I think that's the key learning here is like don't feel like you have to stick to one thing. And generally creatives, they love so many different things, right? But if you start off and you create that niche that gets you in. And then from there, once you build your brand as an individual, then you can grow and start doing multiple different things.
Yes, and you will be surprised what your niche, what new ways your niche brings for you. Because I never intended to work with sneakers. I never intended to have a profession in sneakers as a consultant or as a curator or whatever. I always just was really, really interested in it. And then the situation came like throughout the pandemic, for example. I had a big change in my work through the pandemic because as an event photographer, obviously I could not earn most of my money for a year or two. And therefore, sneakers became more important in the sense that I just spent more time there, spent more time on Instagram connecting, spent more time with people talking about brand-related stuff and things like that. And that's where the outside perception also changed, and they saw, okay, she has some knowledge in that area as well, and vice versa. Clients got aware of that and got back to me.